Chapter 34, Untitled. Durua was picked up by a military off-road vehicle. The rough and rugged body of the vehicle at this moment and her eyes seemed exceptionally solemn. They didn't speak all the way. She felt the atmosphere was heavy, and swallowed the question that came to her mouth. Now was not a good time to ask. Also, who knows, there might be a fierce battle at that time. She relaxed her body and leaned against the back of the chair, closing her eyes to rest. In the heart of a military officer beside her, he couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. In his heart he felt lucky she didn't ask anything, because he was in a hurry to pick her up. It was true that when desperate, anything could be tried, as long as it wasn't the last moment. They didn't know what decision the higher-ups would make. The result would be whether or not they would let her enter the operating room. Therefore, if she asked, they really didn't know how to answer. At the same time, their eyes also revealed admiration. As expected of a military wife, this leisurely part had made many people respect her. Not long after sitting in the car, they led her to the military airport. A line of several people boarded the helicopter. In a small hospital on the outskirts of the small town of Daxingen Mountain, a group of soldiers wearing muddy uniforms and brightly colored ointments on their faces were sitting quietly outside an operating room, their expressions becoming more and more solemn as time passed. Zhao Rui fiercely wiped his face and stood up. I can't stand it anymore. Let's go outside for some fresh air. Qishan glanced at the door, and followed him out. Yang Kaiqing looked at the two backs walking out, then looked at the remaining tired comrades, turned his head to look at the door, frowned, and sighed silently. When Yang Kaiqing reached the door, he saw Qishan leaning against a large tree, a branch in his mouth, grumbling. Do you really think your wife coming here is useful? Yang Kaiqing hesitated a bit, but still said what he wanted to say. The person inside was the commander-in-chief of their operation this time. When they were thinking of a way to rescue the hostage in the kidnapper's hands, because the hostage was panicking, the bandits took the opportunity. Now, although they saved the hostage, they were shot in the head by the bandits. Even though they brought along the best military doctor because of the difficulty of this operation, in such a simple surgical environment, it was feared that the risk was greater than the benefit. Although they all wanted to save the commander-in-chief, Yang Kaiqing still could not understand Qishan's actions in front of the military district leaders. Qishan strongly requested that his wife be brought over. If the treatment failed, then their future would be greatly affected. Moreover, the failure rate was extremely high. Qishan looked deeply at Yang Kaiqing, his eyebrows furrowed. I'm just worried, during the time waiting for my wife to arrive, those guys might not be stable. The person inside was his trainer. Besides his father and grandfather, he was the soldier he respected the most. He hoped to be able to save him. In fact, he was also surprised for himself, when he heard that the military district chief wanted to escort the best doctor. He actually wanted to ask his wife to come. Not only was her medical skills unfathomable in his opinion, but he also believed from the bottom of his heart, for him, she had truly cultivated the ability to take lives in the hands of the god of death. This is. Durua looked outside from the window. The landing place was a lush green forest, hazy. Unlike her calm appearance, the two soldiers wearing military uniforms with gray hair and elegant breath beside them were also slightly surprised. In her eyes flashed a trace of understanding, but in such a situation, in less than a few hours, even if there were minor injuries, could they still persevere to hold on? We are also almost at the destination, because the place we are going does not have an airport for us to land, so we will try our best to fall slowly. Please prepare yourself, slowly climb down from the rope ladder, there will be people below to support us. On the plane, after the military officers and pilots cleared the air, they spoke to Durua and the other three with solemn expressions. Their tone was slightly worried. Sure enough, except for Durua, the other two doctors were all surprised. Although they were soldiers, they were over 50 years old, and were also civil servants. This was a bit of a difficult situation for them. The military officer was worried about this situation, but the one below couldn't wait. He clenched his teeth, looked towards Durua. Sister-in-law, if this continues, can you do it? It wasn't that he was worried, but that she seemed even more incapable of completing this task than the other two doctors. No problem. She assessed the difficulty a bit, then nodded affirmatively. The military officer looked at her with some surprise, then immediately turned around to report the situation to the military district leader. After receiving the confirmed instructions, he immediately ordered the pilot to search for a place to drop the rope ladder. During this time, he took advantage of every second to explain to her the situation she was about to face, and also solemnly conveyed to her that the chief valued the injured person, hoping that she could use all her ability to save him. When Qi Shen and the others heard the rumbling sound, they immediately ran out, but the plane was always flying back and forth in the sky. One hand tightly grasped the other hand. Damn, I'm really confused. I didn't think that there was no place for planes to land near the clinic. As soon as he finished speaking, he almost choked, his heart dropped into his throat. He only saw a long rope ladder lowered from the helicopter. A slender girl was walking down step by step. Durua just opened the door of the plane, and saw her husband standing there dumbfounded, waiting for her to get off, then jumped to the soldiers below who were hastily spreading out the mattress. Waiting until she walked in front of him, he suddenly regained his senses. This was not the time to settle the score with his wife. He immediately turned around and led her to the operating room. The couple did not speak to each other, but the tacit understanding between the two could be seen by those who were observant. She quickly changed into surgical clothes. The moment she entered the operating room, she turned her head to look at him, nodded, and then turned around and walked in. His two hands clenched tightly. He knew, his wife was promising him, she would try her best. She frowned, looking at the man lying on the operating table. The bullet had hit his head. It was really difficult to deal with. The surgery had been going on for more than 3 hours. The situation was getting more and more critical. The chief surgeon, when he saw her come in, his brows were still furrowed very quickly. He didn't understand why such a young doctor was sent by the higher-ups. Now that he saw her glancing at the patient, then playing with the needles beside him, he became even more impatient. The few assistants beside him, although they were suspicious, didn't dare to speak up. Among them, only 2 were nurses, the others were doctors in this small hospital. "What do you want these things for?" He couldn't hold back and shouted in a low voice. She didn't have time to explain. She picked up a needle, found the right acupoint, and slowly inserted it. Without getting an explanation, his face instantly became unsightly, but from her movements, he quickly understood. His face was in disbelief. The blood flow immediately slowed down. She ignored everyone's stunned expression, took his scalpel, and started to operate. After all, he was a professional doctor. Even if he was shocked, he quickly calmed down, tried to cooperate with her. He was even more active on the side as an assistant. "Yes, I promise to report the situation at any time." Hanging up the phone, Yang Kaiching sighed and looked at the door of the operating room. No wonder the military district leader was impatient. 5 hours had already passed, and they were waiting outside the operating room, also impatient and frustrated. No matter how impatient the people outside were waiting, no one in the operating room knew. They were in high spirits, and their passion was shooting out in all directions, burying their heads in the surgery. Even though the 2 military doctors had already rushed to the operating room, the main surgeon had strongly advised them at first. So Durua still firmly occupied the position of the main surgeon. The 2 old military doctors originally had some doubts, but after a long time of running around, they needed time to catch their breath, so they observed from the side, thinking that even if they didn't do anything, they could still give instructions from the side. But after a while of observing, the 2 of them were shocked by her. Even they didn't dare to boast that their attacks could be so precise. The 2 military doctors joined the surgery. This little doctor had no choice but to stay aside and do some trivial things. Even so, they were not happy to go out. This was a perfect opportunity to learn. Even if they had to transfer the surgical knife, they were as happy as honey. She let out a soft breath, a faint smile appeared in her eyes. The surgery was finally completed. Inside the operating room, everyone was staring at the movements in her hands, seeing the completion of the last step. They also exaggeratedly let out a sigh of relief. 1 or 2 young doctors even grinned, their faces carrying huge smiles. If they did not remember that they were in the operating room, they would have shouted out to express their excitement. Even the 3 normally calm military doctors no longer maintained their elegant image of the past, smiling extremely happily. For every doctor, Being able to save a person is something that makes them extremely happy, not to mention that this surgery is a challenge for everyone present. Durua is no exception. Durua, you are really amazing. Yang Xingxing heard her husband's story, her eyes were filled with sparkling stars, she stood up and rushed forward, hugging the woman in front of her. Yang Kaicheng hurriedly held a certain pregnant woman in his arms. Be careful, you're still so impatient when you're about to become a mother. In the future, it's better if the child is still like him. Yang Xingxing rolled her eyes, he was even more exaggerated than her. Durua and Zhao Xiaoman looked at each other and smiled, it was really not like they were family but did not enter the same door. Yang Jingxing's previous appearance, the two of them did not say anything, did not wish for anything. Political Commissar Yang usually looked very calm, seeing his wife pregnant, he also exaggerated it like this. Yang Kaicheng touched his nose, okay, forgive him, this was the child they had worked so hard to have. Thinking about a month ago, he returned home exhausted, his wife stood in the yard, carefully supporting her waist to water the daffodils. In his heart he was still strangely thinking if his wife wanted the child to the point of madness, why did she make herself look pregnant? After knowing that she was really pregnant, he almost went crazy with joy. Seeing off of them, Durua returned to the room, suddenly being tightly hugged in someone's arms, helplessly shaking his head. After returning from that time, Qishan was even more clingy to her than before, making the three little darlings protest, hateful father, domineering mother. He hugged his wife tightly in his arms, murmuring, how many lifetimes of good fortune must I have had, to marry you as my wife? Huh? Even though from the beginning, he was the one protecting her, but since their marriage, it was always her who helped him, and he could help her less and less, even in a battle with the Qiao family, she alone could win a beautiful battle. It seemed that, in times of danger, she didn't need her husband to help. She pulled her husband to sit on the sofa, then she sat on his lap, also not speaking, her face curled up on his chest. He habitually adjusted his posture to let her sit comfortably, the smile in his eyes deepened a bit. I also want to help you. He also did not give her a chance to speak, talking about his own confusion this month. Want to chase away the hateful person for you, want to help you solve all the problems around you, want to give you food and clothing without worry. Saying up to here he laughed bitterly, although he had the ability to do all these things, but, it seemed like the woman in his arms did not need to rely on others to be able to solve things herself. This man, probably because of the previous incident, made him and her unable to get through. He thought that he was because of outsiders, knowing that she didn't like the army containing many rules, and even put her in the eyes of the army. The more he thought about this, the more he got into a dead end, unable to get out. She straightened her back, her hand holding his face, frowning, so. You think about letting go? He wrapped his arms tightly around her back, wishing he could fiercely push her into his body, gritting his teeth, resentfully saying, how is that possible? Even if I'm useless, in this life, don't even think about leaving me. Even if there was a man more outstanding than him, even if he could do all of these things, he still wouldn't let go. Her hand just moved, opened his hand, stood up, looked from above at the man sitting on the sofa. Tonight, you sleep in the living room. After saying that, she turned around, went into the room of the three little ones, and played with them. Leaving him in a daze. After a long while, he laughed out loud. His wife was angry at him for thinking nonsense. Messily wiping his face, that's right, if he decided to die but not let go, then he loved her wholeheartedly. The other thing, being too complicated, would only hinder the relationship between husband and wife. He laughed bitterly, so he said, sleeping in the living room, what, is not beneficial to cultivating the relationship between husband and wife. She heard his laugh, gently snorted, also did not stop the three little ones from hearing their father laugh loudly, immediately became very curious, left the toy behind and ran outside. Secretly said, consider him smart. In fact, he felt that she helped him more, he gave her too little. After all, it wasn't just him, all the acquaintances saw, she actually had everything, he could give too little. On the contrary, she was like a tiger with wings to him, extremely useful. However, they were all not her. Only she knew, what he could give, was her most precious thing. Love, and because he did it, to her, it was nothing more than something she could do.